Thank you and welcome everyone to this very special event with Women Alone Together and the Agnes Scott Alumni Association. I'm Carolyn Curry, and I have been directing Women Alone for 20 years, believe it or not. But we are happy to have with us now Mary Frances Kerr, who is the Director of Alumni Relations at Agnes Scott, and she would like to say a brief hello.
Thank you, Carolyn. We're delighted to be co-sponsoring with Women Alone Together, Lisa Wingate tonight at this wonderful book story that she's going to be telling us about tonight. As Carolyn said, Women Alone Together celebrates 20 years in 2021, and Agnes Scott Alumni Association has been delighted to be there from the very beginning. And this powerful network of women mirrors our mission, and we look forward to being a partner for the next 20 years as well. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Mary Frances. She's doing a great job, and I have recently invited her to come on the board of Women Alone Together, so she will be contributing to our work for a long time. I just want to make a couple of announcements. Remember that Ron Greer will be our speaker next week at the same time on the 18th. And he will be talking with us about dealing with the personal loss in the shadow of COVID-19, dealing with personal loss in the shadow of COVID-19. And I think all of us, whether you've had a loved one pass away in the last year, we've suffered loss. It might be, just the loss of a way of life. And he is excellent. I've heard him do this presentation before, and you don't want to miss that. And also in January, we're going to have Lisa Schulman, Dr. Lisa Schulman, who is a national expert on brain studies. And she has written a wonderful book, Before and After Loss, after she lost her husband. And that will be January the 29th. So always go to our website to see January and future events that are in the process of being planned now. I think we're going to have some wonderful events in the spring. And we are planning to go live in the spring. So be looking forward to those times that we can get together and share again. It's been a long time, and I think it will be very special to be in person. I have been wanting to have Lisa Wingate for a long time. I read her book before, here we go, Before We Were Yours, when it first came out in 2017. And I wanted her then, but it was so enormously popular. Everybody wanted her at that time. And I wasn't able to get her, but my friend Kathy Bennett of Magic Time Literary Publicity, you know her, helped me connect up with Lisa. So we're so excited about having her today. Lisa has been a journalist. She's been an inspirational speaker. She has written 30 novels, believe it or not. And she has just written a new novel called The Book of Lost Friends. I've just read that, and I think you will really enjoy that. And I'm going to refer to this book some in my questions today. And also she wrote Before and After. This is a book we're going to be referring to today. That was listed on our website. She wrote that with a friend, Judy Christie, about how some of the people affected by the Tennessee orphanage came to her during her signings, and they had a reunion. And to introduce that to you, we're going to show a special video. It's about 3.5 minutes, and then we will go straight to Lisa. So if Steve will present that video now. Thank you.
As much as I love history and as much as I was appalled and fascinated and just needed to dig into this, I felt it most deeply as a parent. I raised 2 boys. How would it have been for them if they were suddenly taken from their lives and dropped in one of these holding homes? And, what would it have been like if someone took these 2 little pieces of my heart and they were just gone one day? It meant a lot to me to come back here, where the resting places of the 19 babies they ever admitted died. Some 500 are estimated to have died in the care of the Tennessee Children's Home Society, but the 19 they admitted to are buried here at Elmwood, and their resting place for all these decades lay unmarked, and only a couple years ago the money was raised to put up a monument to them. So it meant a lot to me to be at this place that has this sad but poignant history. The saddest thing to me is when our stories die with us. Our stories are the part of us that live on. Our stories are the part of us that's eternal, but only if they're told. With 5,000 children passing through Georgia Tann's hands, multiply that times birth families, times adoptive families, times 2 or 3 generations down the line, you realize how many people are in some way connected to the nefarious deeds and the decisions of this one woman.
What's been really interesting is after reading your book and then reporting back to some of my book clubs, they said, have you ever thought about trying to get the adopted children together? And I wrote you. He finally said, yeah, let's do that. So this is the fruition of that.
We kind of run the gamut here. We have adoptees, we have children of adoptees, we have family members of children who were stolen by Georgia Tann, even family members who are still looking for children who were stolen by Georgia Tann. I never anticipated I'd be coming back here with children, now adults, who survived this process and went on and made lives for themselves. When you are adopted, you start life with a loss. Coming back here was the final thing in filling that sense of loss, finding other people who've had the same experience. I think that's one of the things that has come out of this weekend, for them to be able to share the stories, their journeys to finding their families, their hidden histories, those pieces of themselves.
She said, I don't remember anything else. I signed papers, I remember that, and she said, that was it. I never saw you.
So when I met my brother, it was like a little piece of a jigsaw puzzle. It made me feel that I kind of knew who I was.
Well, the book touched my soul. I had a hard time reading it because I kept saying, this is my story.
You create these fictional people, you send them out into the world, and the craziest thing is they come back home and tugging by the hand real people with them.
Okay, Lisa, we'll take it to you now. That's
okay.
A video.
Sorry about that. I was silencing a dog.
Oh, that's all right. We're used to having dogs bark occasionally. Don't worry about that if he starts barking. But
well, hopefully he knows
welcome.
now.
Yes, you can proceed.
So it is so good to be here with you. A room full of, even a virtual room full of book lovers is kind of my dream. I've wanted to be a writer since Miss Crackhart told me in the first grade that I would be a writer someday. And I just believed her because, you know, first grade teachers don't lie. Those people early in our lives sometimes speak destiny into us, and she spoke destiny into me. I didn't really grow up in a family who thought that was something you would be for a living. So I kind of grew up in a family that, you know, it wasn't that anybody discouraged me from writing. It was just that they didn't want me living in their basements when I turned 30. So they encouraged me to get a practical college degree, which I did. But I always had it in the back of my mind that I would be a writer someday. Because in the back of my mind was always Mrs. Crackhart telling me I was a wonderful writer and changing the way I thought of myself. And there's this thing you picture when you're young and you want to be a writer, and you imagine that it will be like it is on TV. And on TV, you know, writers drive around in Ferraris and they live at the beach. And you never actually see them slaving away writing. They just go around town and they be writers. So you think, I'll grow up and that's how it'll be for me. I'll write a book, they'll hand me a Ferrari and a beach house, and I'll flit around town and be a writer. And you don't realize that most of the people who get in this business, the reality is when you grow up and you get in this business, for most of the people in this business, it is going to be really hard. And they are going to be really fortunate if they can just make a living and not have to have a day job. And so I was fortunate. I got out of college with my practical degree that my parents insisted I get. And I didn't work at that for very long at all before I started being able to be a full-time writer. And for 30 books and 16 years or so, I had just a nice career. I did a little better than I would have with my practical college degree. So my parents couldn't really complain. And I always had publishers coming to me with contracts, and I never had to go hunt for work. So life was good. But I never had that book that just went crazy in the world, that just exploded into the world and went crazy. And Before We Were Yours, book number 30 was that book for me. It was a completely different experience from the other books. I had changed agents. My agent said, write the whole book and then we'll sell it, which was not something I had done. I hadn't done that in years. I had always written, the books were contracted before I wrote them. So, so just in the privacy of my own soul, I got to write this book, and my agent put it out there on a Wednesday. By Thursday, 10 of the biggest publishers in New York wanted to see it. By Friday, my agent was calling me saying, we have what for me at the time was a huge preempt offer on your book if you won't let it go to auction next week. And then as I stood there with the phone kind of trembling against my ear on our back deck, she said, but I don't think we should take it. I think we'll do better if we just let it go to auction next week. And so I sort of squeaked out into the phone, okay. If you think that's the best thing to do, then okay. And those things always happen on a Friday, so you can worry all weekend, which I did all weekend long. I just sort of panicked about, this was a bad decision. And, this is going to be the wrong thing to do. And by Monday, none of the other publishers will want it. And so that publisher that did want it, they'll say, well, we don't want it either because nobody else wants it. And it'll all fall apart. But it didn't. It went to auction the next week. It sold to Ballantine, which is a subset of Random House. And it landed with this amazing little crew of publishing women who had been together for a lot of years. And in publishing, that's not the most common thing. People transition a lot. There's a lot of change. And they just got behind this little book and they pushed. And so it came out in 6th of June, 2017, which is a lovely time for a book to come out because everybody's going on their summer vacations and they need things to read. But it's also a really hard time for a book to come out because that's when all the summer beach books are coming out. So your Mary Alice Monroe's and your Tom Clancy's and your John Grisham's and your Nora Roberts, et cetera, are all putting their summer books out at the 1st of June too. So our little book came out and it landed about number 18 in national sales that week. And the New York Times bestseller list is 15 books long. So you can see what I'm getting at. We just missed the list. And it's not like a game of pitching horseshoes where, you get points if you're just close to the stake. You either miss the list or you make the list. So everybody was saying, oh, Lisa, your book is doing great. And they kind of quietly weren't saying, but we didn't make the list. And I was thinking, my book is doing great, but we didn't make the list. And so normally if you don't make it your first week, maybe on week 2, you kind of calculate that you're not going to make the list because books tend to come out at their high point when all the people have pre-ordered and all that. And then they downtrend over time the longer they're out. So this little book was doing kind of a strange thing though. It was kind of staying steady and trending up a little bit as the summer went on. And we thought, maybe, you know, as the lists soften up and your Tom Clancy's and your John Grisham's quit occupying spots, you know, maybe we'll kind of creep on there. And we thought maybe 4th of July weekend, because there was you know, your big authors aren't going to put a book out then. It's sort of a soft weekend. We didn't make it then either. And sometimes in life, you just have to kind of sit yourself down and have a little talk with yourself about your expectations, which I did. And had settled it with myself. And then a couple weeks later, 8 weeks after publication, this little book crawled its way onto the New York Times bestseller list. And then it proceeded to stay there for 54 weeks in soft cover and another 52 weeks in hardcover. And the thing is, it wasn't because after the fact, it was the greatest way to make the list, because, you know, it wasn't because Oprah called or, you know, we got on Good Morning America Book Club or anything big happened. It was just folks. It was just people who told people, who put it in someone's hand in an airport bookstore, who told the people in their book club, who brought it for a neighbor for a gift. It was just old-fashioned word of mouth. And ultimately, that was the best way to make the list, because what it said to me was, in this great big Facebook, Twitter, electronic, disconnected, we talk past each other, but not to each other world, there is still tremendous power in old-fashioned word of mouth, in just speaking to people on a human level about the things that matter to us, about the things that made us think or that touched us in the heart. And so if any of you out there were any of those people, first of all, I just want to say thank you, because you made a huge lifelong dream come true, and mine and my first grade teachers. And it's just been so exciting ever since to see where this book has traveled, who it has touched, to hear from the real life people and end up putting their stories together in a book and bringing them together to meet each other, which we can talk more about during the Q&A if you want to. But you know, it's been this amazing adventure, this amazing journey. So I'll talk a little bit about a couple of the questions that are most often asked, and then I would love to take your questions. So people always ask, there are a few things people always ask when you start the press interviews and you're doing the things that go with the book coming out. There are a couple most often asked questions. So one of the most often asked questions is always, did any of this come from your own life? You know, is this any of this from your own life? Is this is any of this a real life experience for you? And not in this book, not on the side of adoption. There were a few adoptions in my family, but none that I'm close up to, cousins and a few things. But my brothers used to try to tell me I was adopted. We look so much alike that substitute teachers in the school would point at me and say, "You have a brother in the 6th grade, don't you? And you better not be anything like him, young lady." So I always knew there was no way I was adopted, even though sometimes I wished I could be. But this story, because it is set in Memphis, and if you've spent any time in Memphis or toured there or watched movies set there or anything, you know that Memphis is a river city. The tone and tenor and pace of the city for generations has moved to the seasons of the river. River life is the identity of Memphis. And I do know a little bit about life on a river. So there's always pieces of your own life that come into a book. And as a kid, we had our own mighty Mississippi River. It was really just kind of a little dirt bottomed creek that had dug its way about 10 or 15 feet down into the soil in this little horseshoe shaped 1960s neighborhood, 1960s, 70s era neighborhood. as the kind, those were back in the days when there was nothing on TV you wanted to watch unless it was Saturday morning. Our moms set us out the door first thing in the morning, and as long as you were home by the time the street lights came on, or whenever your mama told you it was, you should be home for supper or whatever, nobody worried about you. Nobody wondered where you were. We'd go out in the morning, and if we got hungry for lunch, we'd just go in the nearest house, and the mama there would feed us and peanut butter and jelly usually, and Kool-Aid. And we just wandered and we made up stories. Whatever we read about in a book or saw on TV, we'd go out under the pine trees and we'd rake the needles and make our little walls of our little house, playhouse rooms, that we imagined our rooms, and we would make up these lives. And that's really where I learned to tell a story. And the very center of kid exploration and adventure in this little neighborhood was this little body of water that ran through everybody's backyards. And we would, it depended on the time of year, but once every couple of weeks or once a month or something, we would decide that we were going to have an adventure, and we were going to go farther down that creek than any kid in the history of Bridle Trails neighborhood had ever gone. And so we would pack a little backpack with some snacks and lunch, because, an adventure of that magnitude would require supplies. So we would pack our supplies and we would set off down this creek, and we'd go, and we would watch the colors of the dragonflies, and we would wade in the water and fish at our favorite fishing holes or whatever we had on the agenda for the day. And it would get kind of toward evening. You couldn't tell much down there because it was so shady down in this 15 feet down in this creek bed. But you could kind of feel the insects changing the way the insects sounded. It would kind of get cool down in there toward evening. And, we would start to tell each other stories about how we were so far from home by now that, we might not make it home before dark, and our mamas might have to, call the police to come find us, and, kidnappers or wild animals could be down there. Anything could happen when you were that far down the creek. And then what would happen is what used to happen in old-fashioned neighborhoods before cell phones. The mama calls would start to go out across the neighborhood to call the kids in for supper. So we would be in our minds down in the Congo searching for lost tribes of man or whatever we were doing. And we would hear, Lisa, Laura, Annabeth. And we would come up out of that creek, y'all, and we were still in someone's backyard the entire time. And that is the thing that, pieces of your own life always come in, because when I envisioned these kids on this shanty boat on the Mississippi River in 1939, this is exactly the life they're living. They're passing right through people's backyards, as shanty boat people did, but they don't realize it. They're very unaware of the world outside, and the world outside is fairly unaware of them. It's these two separate worlds that butt right up against each other, but don't have a lot to do with each other. And that was the nature of shantyboat people. And they were their own communities. They had their own campsites. They might stay in a town for a while and work a while, or, get medical treatment or something if they needed it. But mostly they lived their own separate lives, and they would drift down river till they got to the end, and then they'd get a tow back up river behind a motorized boat of some kind, however far north they wanted to go. And so that is the only world these kids know until their world intersects with what is happening in Memphis in 1939. And that, of course, is where the story kicks off. People ask me always, how did I know about it? Why did I write about it? How did I hear about it? How did I come across the real life history? for me, there's always, on every book, there's a spark. And I never know what it's going to be. If I went looking for the spark, I would never find it. But it's always something, it's usually some piece of history, either personal history or, real, some just general piece of history I come along, or someone tells me a personal story. And this one, again, was completely random. I was up late working on another book. I kind of knew I was going to pull an all-nighter because I had a deadline. I had a manuscript I needed to finish. I kind of knew I probably wasn't going to bed that night. I had turned the TV on and turned the sound down because, when even the dog gives up on you and goes to bed, it's just lonely. So I had just left the TV playing. I wasn't listening to it. I looked up about 2 a.m. and there was an episode of Discovery Channel's Deadly Women on. And at that time on the screen, it was an episode called Above the Law. So it was about women who did heinous crimes, but for some reason they could not be prosecuted. So at that time on the screen was this big mansion. I can tell it's kind of the 40s because of the furniture and things. And the front room of this mansion is full of babies. And I'm thinking, what is this about? And so I turned on the TV and I took on in the story of this woman and what she was able to get away with for almost 3 decades in Memphis. And just to put you in a headspace a little bit of what was going on, and because there are 2 sides to this story. On one side, okay, you are a person who desperately wants to be a parent. You live in a culture where, within about a year of the wedding, everybody has babies. It's just what's done, not less than a year from the wedding. My grandmother's first baby was born 9 months to the day after the wedding. And we barely escaped being the town scandal. But for you, this never happens. Your friends have babies, your cousins have babies, all your contemporaries have babies. It's never your turn. You maybe try to adopt through your Catholic adoption agency or your Methodist Children's Home or your county services. And maybe because you have a divorce in your history, or because you and your husband are different religions or different denominations of the same religion. Or maybe just because you're well over 30 by then, it becomes apparent there will never be a child for you. And so you think this dream is dead. And all of a sudden, you hear about this place where you can go and you can make it happen just like that, if you can afford it. Not only that, you're going to be able to pick hair color, eye color, age, gender, 1 child or 2. Would you like 2 who look alike? Maybe twins, if you can afford it. Or, one looks like your husband, one looks like you. I mean, it sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? I mean, little made to order children just like you want them. But it's the 20s through the 50s. So these are real kids. They're not little Stepford children clones or something. They're real children. And the other side of the story is where they are coming from. Because while some of them are orphans, there aren't enough orphans to fill the orders once this business gets going. And the other side of that story is where the rest of them are coming from. And to put you in that headspace a little bit, imagine that you are a parent who's down on your luck. Maybe it's the depression, you've lost your farm. Maybe dad has died and you are a woman with a bunch of children to raise and not the financial means to do it. Maybe you're a young girl who's just gotten yourself in trouble with a man who's not willing to marry you. For whatever reason, you're hungry, you're needy, you're desperate. You go to a free milk and bread clinic, or a place that offers help with housing, or a place that offers medical care for young girls in trouble. You go someplace for help. The people there are very nice to you. They ask you some questions, where are you? Do you have any more children? Where are you living right now? When we're ready to help you, where can we find you? They give you some papers to sign that you may or may not be able to read, because you might quite well be illiterate during that time period. When you leave there, you leave thinking all your problems are solved. What you don't realize is you may turn around someday soon and your children will be gone. That is the crazy reality of what happened to thousands of families in Memphis during this time. And when I learned about it, I just had questions. I couldn't, how can something like this happen? Didn't people know about it? Why didn't these people just go get their kids back out of the orphanage after Georgia took them? Didn't they have some idea what happened to their children? Why didn't they go to court and say, no, that's my child. I didn't give up my child. And what I read were things like, if you could muster the resources to go to court, if you even knew whatever happened to your child, which you quite well might not, if you could muster the resources to go and fight, if you went to the orphanage, you'd be told your child was already adopted out and you couldn't, there was nothing to be done about it. So many of the times your child was actually inside that orphanage, but you would be told they'd been adopted out. If you could go to court, you would be told by the judge, your child has already been given to someone who can give them much more than you can, and you will not be getting that child back. And if you still want children, you may as well just go out and have some more. That is the crazy reality. And so I just digging into it, thinking, is this really true? Is all of this true? I found out it was all true, and more things were true, and the effects it had on these families. And so that was the nugget that became the story of these 5 little shanty boat kids who, through like all the real life families, just randomly, wrong place, wrong time, kids walking home from school down a dusty dirt road, and Georgia Tan comes along the road, and the family's life just takes this 90-degree turn because they happened to cross her radar. So that's how the book came to be. That's how this journey started. Book number 30 was the one that just went crazy in the world. I'm going to close up with just kind of a funny research story about the book, and then I would love to answer any questions that you have. So we were talking, a little bit about river life and all that. So one of the things that was, it's never, the things that are hard to research are never what you think. The things you think will be hard will just be super simple. You can find the information on the internet or whatever, and it's easy, or you'll find a book about that or whatever. It's always some weird thing. So one of the weird things with this story was just propulsion on the river. How are the boats getting around? It's 1939. We're kind of at the end of the big steam era, and we're moving on into gas and diesel. We're about to start World War II, so things are changing a lot. In particular, I needed for one of the little shanty boats to have a motorized John boat or skiff, a little motorized boat, so they can go up current in the Mississippi River in one scene and across the Mississippi River in one scene. And so I asked my little, my man children, who are avid fishermen, what kind of a boat motor would be on a little John boat in 1939? And they looked at me like I was crazy. Mom, we weren't alive in 1939. How would we know? And so I did the next best thing. I asked Dr. Google, and on Google, I found this really pretty little motor called a water witch. And I just liked the name of it, to be honest. I just like, water witch. It sounds like mysterious, and it would dig up all the gumbo on the bottom of the river, and it would, old bones and buried bodies would come from the water witch. And so I put a water witch on the back of the boat, sold in the Sears catalog. I figured fairly accessible to people. It turns out that a water witch is the hardest motor to research in the whole world, as far as I can tell. I can't find out how do you start it. Is it a key? Is it you pull a string? How do you start it? How do you steer it? Is there a steering wheel on the boat, or is it just a little tiller handle on the motor? And most importantly, how powerful is it? Can it push a John boat up current in the Mississippi or not? And so at this point, I'm kind of attached to the Water Witch. I don't want to take it out of the story because I like it. And so I just do what you do when you're a writer and you've fallen in love with something, but you can't find the research. I even go to the boat motor museum / barbecue joint / convenience store outside Hot Springs, Arkansas, to see if I can solve these details, and I can't. They don't have a Water Witch there either, in case you're ever wondering. But so you just fudge it. As a writer, you just fudge the details. So instead of saying how they started it, you say something like, and the motor roared to life. So I just fudge the details. I send it to my editors in New York. It's no big deal because editors in New York don't know how you start a Water Witch motor in 1939 either. But in the back of my mind, there's that one little old man out there who restores antique boat motors. And when he reads this book someday, he's going to write to me and say, a Water Witch could not push a boat up current. You don't do your research. So it's bugging me. So I go for a writer's weekend with my friend, Judy Christie of Before and After fame, my journalist friend who worked with me on Before and After. And we're at her brother's cabin on Caddo Lake, this big cypress lake in Texas and Louisiana. And we're having a lovely time, and we've got an agenda. We're going to work hard and brainstorm plots and talk about the book market and all these things. Meanwhile, next door in his cabin, Sam the fisherman he's got time on his hands because only certain hours of the day are good for fishing. So Sam keeps calling over. We're out on our deck. Sam's on his deck. Y'all come over and visit. We go out on our dock. Sam's out on his dock. Y'all come over. I've got iced tea. So at the end of the visit, Judy says, look, Lisa, we cannot leave without going over to Sam's cabin. He's super proud of it. We don't want to hurt his feelings. So we go over there and we walk up the steps. Everything's up on piers. We walk up the steps into Sam's cabin, and it is like, I get in there and I am like a photographer on a Paris runway at a fashion shoot with my iPhone. Because remember, the man children who are avid fishermen. This place is a fisherman shack deluxe. The cabinet knobs are little bobbers. The lamps are fishing poles. The toilet paper is on a giant fishing reel. So I'm taking all these pictures. I want to show the man children what kind of a shack they can have if they stay in college. So I take all these pictures. I turn around to leave. There by the door we came in is Sam's big desk that sits in a bay window looking out toward the lake. And beside the desk sits this motor on a stand. And I get a little closer and I can see it has this lovely Art Deco case. And I get a little closer and I can see the W. And I look at Sam and say, is that a Water Witch? And Sam says, yes, that's my 1939 fully restored Water Witch. So I take two lessons from that. One, you never know when the research will just fall from the sky and land in your lap. But secondly, and most importantly of all, you should never ignore your neighbors. So you just never know. Books are such an adventure. So I am happy to answer any questions you have. The UPS man has come and gone, and the dog did not bark, so I want to give him credit for that.
Well, that's fascinating because I'm a historian and I love to do research. And sometimes people get so lost in doing research that they don't write. You can just do research, but you have to be curious. And obviously you were curious and you were watching your facts. I wanted to ask you, there's one technique that you use in both of the books that I have read, Before We Were Yours and the other book that we talked about, the Book of Lost Friends. You talk about 1939 and what happened in 1939. And then you reach to the present. You call it the present. And I find that sometimes when you're writing about something that's hard, you know, like the conditions inside the orphanage and how real is having such a hard time and is so upset. And then you switch to the present, and that relieves the tension a little bit. Do you do that on purpose, or is that just a technique that you're using to tell your story?
It is a little of both, to be honest. There is a point, and it's always a little bit of a balancing act when you're dealing with tough pieces of history. There's a point at which you're creating a world that is too hard for an audience to live in, or for a lot of people to live in for 365 pages or whatever. And to me, as a writer, that's a mistake. You know, I want to create a world that people can stand to live in. And when the world is really tough, it does help to break it up. And so we're not, you know, and give a little breathing room so we can catch a breath. The other reason for the dual time frame is I'm fascinated by, one of the fascinating aspects of history to me is, how is it affecting us now, even if we don't know about it? Even if we don't know the details of what happened, they've been lost to time. How somebody out there is being affected today by that history, whether it's family history you don't know, or community history you don't know. Who stood on this slice of ground before you? What happened in this place? You know, places are a layer cake of all the things that happened there before. And, you know, so I'm always fascinated with what happened here before. How are we affected by it? And how might we change what we do with life if we found out, if we knew? And so it's both of those things. You know, that one of the first things I thought of with this story is, there are people out there whose families were changed in this way, and they don't even know it. You know, people didn't always tell kids. Some of the kids in Before and After were not told they were adopted until they found out in some weird way. You know, I just talked to a woman, I hear from the adoptees all the time. I just talked to a woman the other day, a woman from Memphis, who found out at 71 years old that she is not who she thought she was.
Wow.
Yeah, can you imagine?
That is fascinating. Well, I sense that maybe you were doing that, but having you explain it is so meaningful. And I do think that our stories are important. I always am looking in history, going back, trying to tell stories that have been forgotten, especially of women. That's my primary interest. And I was wondering when I was reading the book, is it hard for you to write these really horrific things when the tension gets really hard? Is it, you have to have that release for yourself, I would imagine. Martha Hall Kelly's son said to her, when she came and spoke to us about Lilac Girls, her son said, when he came home from school, he could tell when she had been writing about the evil doctor, you know, the German doctor, then that so bad and so evil. Does it affect you? I mean, do you get in moods that you have to shake and that sort of thing because you live it so?
Oh, definitely. And there's always, with my stories, there's always a much darker level of the things that really happened than what makes its way into the book, or usually, you know. And in this case, I mean, what happens to the kids in the story is about midway. I mean, there are some really nice adoption stories that came out of Tennessee Children's Home Society, but there are a whole level of them that are much more awful than what's in the book. And, you know, and yeah, those things are upsetting because it's just so sad to think people can do things like this to each other for money, for power, for fame, you know, to have control over people. And you don't want to think someone could do that, and especially to little children who cannot in any way defend themselves, you know. So yeah, the realities are sad and upsetting sometimes. But I think you have to do it because you believe it's important to preserve the history, you know, to preserve the lessons of the history, because the only way you stop that from repeating itself is for people to be sensitized to it, for people to understand what happened live it a little bit from the inside, which is the beauty of story, to live it a little bit from the inside. And so when we see it in real life, hopefully we think, oh gosh, I know how that feels. And you don't, but you do, because there's a lot of scientific proof these days. We've always known it, but scientific proof that if they monitor our brain activity when we're reading fiction, that if you read about diving into a pool of water, for instance, your brain is lighting up in the same way as if you were in real life diving into a pool of water. So that means the fiction we read in some way is building life experience in us. So that's the importance of it. You're in some way, when what you take in fiction is in some way informing your brain. It's building experience in you, which hopefully changes the way you react to things in the world that you come across.
Well, you're such a good writer and a good storyteller, and you make us feel the dampness in the basement. You make us feel the anguish when Real has her siblings taken away from her. And certainly that is partly your skill, but the more details you get into your writing, and you take us there. And I really congratulate you on that. And I want to mention to you, talking about how horrific this was, this is an article that was in the AJC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, November the 4th, talking about someone very similar to Georgia Tann named Dr. Thomas Hicks. And he was in McKaysville, Georgia. And from the 1920s, 30s, up until even the 60s, he was doing the same thing Georgia Tann was doing. And they point out that there's such poor regulation of adoption, and there's a federal law, but yet each state has control over the laws that govern adoption in their state. And Georgia was so bad. Well, this Dr. Hicks was run out of Tennessee, and he came down to Georgia. And he started doing this. And there's a young woman who has written a book, and I will just give you her name in case anybody's interested. Her name is Blasio, and she discovered late in life that she had been adopted from this place. And she has now written a book. It's a history book similar to your book, disclosing the horrible things they were doing there. Her name is Jane Blasio, and the name of her book is Taken at Birth. And it's written about McKaysville, Georgia. And her family came down from Ohio to adopt easily her older sister. And then 4 years later, they came down to McKaysville to adopt her. And she found out that she had been wrapped in a blanket, handed through a car window with dried blood still on her body. And she found out, how horrific was that? I mean, it was almost like they're just, giving these children away, selling these children. And then they went back to Ohio. And the state of Georgia is still looking at their adoption laws and changing them. Like, the mother has so long to change her mind after she gives birth. It used to be like 10 days. I think now it's 4 days or something like that. And it's the adoptee family, the biological family of the adoptee family. Everybody is hurt by this, and it's just going on still in our country. And I think you have helped to expose it, which is such a valuable thing, and we're so grateful that you did. I had one question that came in from chat, and they wanted to know, when you found the water witch, is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Did it have enough power to actually push the boat?
Yes, it did. So, because that would have been a heartbreaker at that point, but yes, it did. And so I learned all about it firsthand, which was, not only fun, but a relief, because I didn't have to take the water witch out of the story.
That's great. Well, I know I listened to Margaret Atwood on her little master class that she does. And she said, if you ever put anything in a book that is not accurate, somebody's going to tell you about it.
Oh, yes.
That's what you were worried about. And that's what I worry about too. But I wanted to ask you about these people that have been contacting you. Did you anticipate that this would happen when you wrote the book? That the adoptees would start coming? So you weren't expecting it, but they have.
I was not expecting it. I had interviewed, as I worked on the book, a couple of real life Tennessee Children's Home Society adoptees. And they were both had been baby adoptees, so they didn't remember the orphanage or anything. You know, it's been enough years past that there aren't many alive who remember the experience, but they would talk to me on the proviso that I did not out them. They had both been adopted into prominent Memphis families. And, you know, they saw this scandalous, because it was a big scandal when it broke. They still had this kind of hush, hush, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it in public feeling about it all. So, you know, we talked, but they didn't want to be associated in a public way. So I just didn't anticipate this at all. And I wasn't even through the book tour. So, you know, a few weeks into the book tour, I started having people show up at events and say, you know, my grandmother was an adoptee. I was an adoptee. And some of the adoptees were showing up, or my sibling was taken away and was adopted out by Georgia Tan or whatever. And people were showing up with what we in before and after call their adoptee Bibles, you know, which is notebooks or push carts full of documentation and the fake birth certificate and the real birth certificate, and photos sometimes of reunions once they found their family and all the tracking they did to get there and you know, people were showing up with that. And when I got home, people were sending me those things, scans of them on email and saying, you know, telling me their stories. And they all kept asking, have you heard from any of the others? How do they feel about it? Would you ever get all of us together? And so that I kept thinking, that would be great. You know, we should do that. And then the book hit the bestseller list. I was traveling, things were busy. We had a man-child graduating from college. You know, we're scraping together old sets of silverware and stuff for an apartment for him. And, you know, and so things were just busy. And then I was asked to go speak at what you saw in the video, that glass chapel at Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis, which is a historic, you can go there and take tours and all that. Elmwood also has the official burial plot of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. 500 to 600 kids are estimated to have died in their care. The 19 they ever admitted to are buried in this burial plot in Elmwood. Sat unmarked for decades until a cemetery volunteer looked at that corner lot under this giant magnolia tree and said, what is that? And found out what it was. So they got money together, they put up this monument. So I was asked to go speak there as a fundraiser for Elmwood. And I thought, you know, if you're ever going to do this for these people, this is a place, this is the time. You've been asked to go to Memphis. And so we just, in conjunction with my dear friend, Judy Christie, who jumped in bravely when this was only a few months away, we just put the word out there. And I thought, you know, I don't know if people will come. It scared me to do it because what if it's a terrible experience? What if creepy people show up? What if it's weird? You know, what if nobody comes? But sometimes you just have to do the stuff that scares you, you know, and they came, they flew in from all over the country, and I was watching that video and realizing 2 of those people are dead already. They're gone. Their stories, had they not, you know, their stories are in before and after, but those stories would have perished with them. And, you know, that was the feeling I had when we got them together. It's a shame to get these people together and not preserve their stories. And so that was Judy Christie came and she did interviews, and that was the genesis for Before and After.
Exactly. And this is the book, and I recommended it to our women if they want to read it. One of our members was at the Decatur Book Festival where you were speaking about your book. And she was actually, I think she was sitting behind one of the women you write about in chapter 7. You call her Patricia. was so interesting. She was born on Christmas Day in 1942, and I think the doctor named her Christmas Carol or something like that. And she was at Georgia Tans for 13 months, I believe. And then there was a Jewish family in New York who had tried to have children for like 20 years and couldn't, heard about Georgia Tan. And they wrote, I guess, initially and said they wanted to adopt and they wanted a Jewish child. So suddenly this little Christian girl, Christmas Carol, became a little Jewish girl. And Georgia Tan would just lie about, religion. And they wanted a boy, if I remember correctly. And she said, well, the boy got away, or we don't have the boy, but we have a beautiful little girl. And then they came and saw the little girl and were really taken with her. And she was very cute. And but she was raised Jewish. And it's a very interesting story you tell. And I know this is not her real name, Patricia, you're protecting her. But if you remember a little bit about her story, she didn't want to find her parents, her biological parents, because her adoptive parents were so wonderful. They just adored her and they gave her a wonderful life. But then after they had died, she gradually, encouraged by her friends, did seek out those her parents and her family, and she ends up meeting her sisters and really was close with her sisters. That was a moving story.
Yeah, hers was an amazing story. And it was one of the first, that was on that first early book tour. So hers was one of the first stories I heard. And that ended up being a commonality between many of them. Many of them felt had either been discouraged by family from talking about it or from pursuing it, as in, you have all these privileges. Why should you want to know? You should just be grateful or happy with the life you have. Or they felt that it was disloyal to the adoptive parents. And then sometimes people still just feel like, my life is okay. Do I really want to open that can of worms, which may or may not be a nice, addition to my life at this point? And so people have all different feelings about it, and hers are not at all uncommon. And she's one of those stories where she ended up, the rest of the story of the sisters, her sisters, it's a very sad story. The mother was very messed up. And the sisters, the older sister ended up getting married at, like 14 or 15 to get out of the household, and took the younger sister with her. And, they just had a very hard life compared to what Patricia had, which was sort of this golden life with these parents. I mean, she talks sometimes about how much her father adored her. They sent her off to camp when she was, probably in elementary school or whatever. And he would call every day and say, I can come get you. You just say the word. I can come get you, and so she was very loved, and she had this wonderful history and wonderful growing up. But it doesn't stop you from just wanting to own the rest of your own story. It's the most natural thing in the whole world. But when you've always had your own story, when you've grown up in your birth family and your family's story, you just don't think about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it was so moving when they said that she looked more like her mother than the other siblings. And that was a wonderful story. And do you keep up? You said somebody just called you. Are you going to have another reunion?
We had a second one when Before and After came out, and had more new families with us, because there are new people all the time who come across the book or my name or one of the videos or whatever for some reason, and they want one of the adoptees who helped plan the first reunion has helped, gosh, I don't know, probably a couple dozen or more families since then find their histories, because she really knows how to navigate the paperwork and DNA and all these things. And so there were new ones all the time. So we had reunion number 2 and celebrated the release of Before and After with all of them, which was super sweet. They all have, you and I were talking earlier about how they have the names in the book are, fictionalized names to protect their privacy a little bit. And because the publisher wanted us to do that. And so Judy and I got to the second reunion when we're going to celebrate the book coming out. And we did the first thing we had a late night flight, delayed, all this stuff, didn't know if we were going to get there, so we got in the middle of the night to the hotel where we were all staying. And Judy and I had to bounce out in the morning, go be on the local TV in Memphis. And so we were standing in the lobby waiting on our limo to come get us. And Judy kind of pokes me and she points at the breakfast room, and there are a bunch of the adoptees in there having breakfast. She says, don't go in there. They'll all want to talk to you. We've got to get out of here and get to the TV station. But she says they have on their name tags, they've written, because we had given them name tags. She said they've written their name in the story, their real name, and what chapter number they are in the story.
So they weren't worried about that, eh?
No, not a bit. They were claiming it out loud.
Well, I know one person has asked, you've already touched on some of this, what happened to Georgia Tan? That's in the book, but maybe she hasn't read it yet. And the children who were there when all the scandal hit. And just tell us a little bit about that. I know it's at the end of the book, but it is amazing that she never had to pay.
She did not. So what happened to Georgia Tan? What happens to this whole scandal is politics changes. Boss Crump had Memphis, Boss Crump had the state of Tennessee. Georgia Tan got in with Boss Crump, which gave her all the power, social services, police, ability to go into any hospital, ability to keep any new laws from being passed. She has all this power. Eventually the politics change. Crump is out. Governor Browning comes in, and Governor Browning appoints a special prosecutor to dig into Tennessee Children's Home Society, which he does. So in the very late 40s, the net is tightening around her. And she's also running out of money because she lived a very lavish lifestyle. So, she's really doing bolder things all the time as she feels more invincible, but as she needs more money too. It's a double-edged thing. So in 1950, the results of this investigation are released. Governor Browning has a press conference. At the same time, Georgia Tan has been for the past month at home in her bed, dying from uterine cancer she never sought treatment for. So she dies within 3 days of the press conference happening, and literally her glowing obituary as the mother of modern adoption runs in the same paper as the press conference detailing her crimes. And so that is the end of it. The 22 remaining kids in the orphanage, almost none of them are given, one or two, I think, were given back to their families, but most of them proceed on through the adoption system. And then there's a period of panic among adoptive families. A lot of the adoptees I've met have these desperate, terrified letters their parents wrote to legislators and other people, afraid their children would be taken away because Georgia Tan would withhold birth certificates and things, because then people would kind of keep sending a little check here, a little money there, and saying, we still really need the birth certificate or whatever. And so, there's terror there. And then also on the birth family side, some of those birth families thought, we'll finally get our children back. And so, there's all kinds of clamor, which basically leads the legislature to seal all the records. And, they just can't hush it fast enough. And they're pretty successful at that. And it just goes away after a while.
And they didn't open those records, I think, until the 1990s, did they?
Yes, these people, with the help of a woman named Denny Glad and the Tennessee Right to Know Project, fought to get those records open until the mid-90s when they finally got them open. And there's a splash of, people ask about the research, there's a big splash of publicity and quite a few stories coming out in the mid 90s when the paperwork's opened, stories of reunions where families are finally able to find each other and where sibling groups have come back together and they're on, Oprah and 60 Minutes. And a lot of that is can be found on YouTube these days. If you want to go back and watch it, you can just Google on YouTube, Georgia Tan scandal, 60 Minutes or Oprah or whatever.
There's quite a bit out there because I've gone and looked at some of them. And it was just astounding talking about the money she made. When you think about Joan Crawford got was it twins from her or 2 children?
No, yes, twins.
Yeah, and June Allison. I mean, they went to Hollywood and they were working with big money people, and it was an amazing racket.
Very much so. She would have it's I don't know that you see it in any of the press coverage, but a number of people have told me, a number of the adoptees have told me they were told by their adoptive parents, they would have, she would develop a market somewhere. So like among the Jewish community, she was kind of in with rabbis and things that would help her identify. It was a great place for her to get rid of a kid who, might be part Native American or part Italian. She could say, oh, this is a Jewish baby. And there were a lot of Jewish families looking to adopt and having a hard time adopting. And they would, out in Hollywood, she was in with a club of people that was actors and theater people involved in the entertainment industry. And they would have kind of like Tupperware parties, where you would go and someone who had adopted from Georgia Tan would have some brochures of cute little kids, and the orphanage, and kind of spread the word. And that was how she would develop these markets of interconnected people who told other people, who had little parties and told a bunch of their friends where they could go get a cute, perfect kid.
Oh, it's just astounding. And then to how they neglected the children that were not as cute, and then they died or they were sickly and they didn't get proper medical care. It's just horrific. Well, you've done such a marvelous job, and you're still talking about this book that you wrote in 2017, and I imagine you'll be talking about it from now on. But what are you writing now?
So
little preview.
A little preview. I have learned the hard way. If you're writing about, that is the tricky thing about writing about pieces of history, is the things can surface and then 10 people write about it. And so I was always going to write about the pack horse librarians. I came across the Kentucky's pack horse librarians from the WPA era years ago, probably 10 years ago. And it was in my idea drawer to write about. Someday I'll write about these women who took books up into the mountains during the Depression on pack mules. And isn't that amazing? And everything. And, now that's been done by 2 different people. So I have learned not to put your pieces of history out there specifically, but I'm working on something that's kind of the turn of the century, which is a fascinating time for me, a little after the turn of the century, because, my grandmother was born in 1906. And so that period of history when so much is changing. I mean, she went from horses and buggies to automobiles, and telephones and electricity and indoor plumbing, and her first movie she went to, a picture show she ever, Wizard of Oz. And so it's so interesting to think, we're just that generation away from such a different life.
Exactly. And that's funny you should bring that up, because I'm doing an interview tomorrow. Someone has asked to interview me about my grandmother, who was born in 1900. And she remembered the first time she saw an automobile, the first time she saw an airplane. There's so many firsts of things that we take so for granted today. And it was a very she lived to be 76 years old, and she saw so much in her life, and she was a big influence on me. So I may end up writing about her someday. I hope I will. But at any rate, this has been wonderful. We've got some other questions, but I think that we will wrap it up now. And I just want to thank you. And I also want to thank you. Everybody knows I'm writing a book, and Lisa's been so nice to me about that. And She encourages other writers. I think that's admirable. She's so generous, and she was generous with her time today. And we are very thankful. And we wish you the best with your new
Well,
book.
thank you. It has been so fun to talk to you. I apologize again for the dog getting us started off on the wrong foot, but we've had peace and quiet, so that's good.
We love dogs and cats, and they're always around. But thank you, and you have a lovely evening. Thank you very much. And we'll remind all of our women to come back next week to hear Ron Greer on the 18th. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good being with you.
Good being with you. Bye-bye.
Bye.